Chapter 1. The Red Veil Contract. Rain turned Aldorf's backstreets into a sluice for filth. It hammered the slate roofs and ran down crooked gutters in dirty sheets, carrying ash, dung, and old blood into the kennel-dark alleys where the city forgot its own name. Lantern lights smeared across puddles like spilt tallow. The air stank of wet leather, sour beer, and the sharp coppery tang of fear, fresh, hot, and close. Rudolf Kessel-Rook, to the sort of men who got hunted, moved through it like he belonged to the night. His coat was cut fine enough to offend the poor and ruined enough to reassure them. A broad-brimmed hat kept the worst of the rain off his eyes. The rest of him was all angles. Boots that didn't slip, hands that didn't tremble, a smile that showed up when it was useful and vanished when it wasn't. Ahead, the grave robber ran. The man's name was Hold Spade Marnick, though he'd been called worse by better people. He barreled around a corner, clutching a sack that clinked with stolen grave goods, and nearly went down on slick stones. He caught himself on a wall, leaving a smear of mud and something darker. His breath came in ragged, panicked barks. He looked back once, just once, and that was the mistake. Rook was already there, cutting the angle. Spade burst into a narrow alley choked with stacked barrels and broken crates. The end was blocked by a collapsed fence and a brick wall. He skidded, tried to turn, and found Rook standing where the light could catch the dull gleam of a pistol butt and the calmer gleam of certainty. "Evening," Rook said, as if they'd met over cards. "You're late." Spade's eyes flicked left, right, anywhere but at the wall behind him. "Move," he hissed, and brought up a short knife, the kind a desperate man buys because it makes him feel taller. Rook didn't move. Rain drummed on his hat brim. Somewhere nearby, a dog howled like it had seen something it couldn't forget. "You stole from the wrong dead," Rook said, "and you sold to the wrong living. Both groups have complained. Spell longer." He was fast, which was the cruel joke of it, just fast enough to make the moment feel like it might go his way. The knife flashed toward Rook's ribs. Rook turned his torso, let the blade scrape his coat instead of his flesh, and stepped inside the swing. A fist like a hammer drove into Spade's throat. The grave robber made a wet, choking sound and stumbled backward, trying to suck air through a throat that refused to cooperate. Rook didn't give him time to recover. He hooked Spade's wrist, twisted, and forced the knife hand down. Bones complained. Spade's eyes bulged. He tried to headbutt, but Rook met him halfway with his forehead hard, precise, and Spade's vision went into watery stars. Spade swung his sack like a club. The clinking weight caught Rook's shoulder. Pain flared, hot and bright. Rook's mouth tightened. He stepped in again and drove a knee into Spade's midsection. Spade folded, gagging, the knife slipping from numbed fingers. Rook caught the falling knife by the handle without looking. He held it up between them. "This?" he asked, mild as a tutor. Spade tried to spit. Mostly he drooled. Rook tapped the flat of the knife against Spade's cheek, like a man checking the ripeness of fruit. "No, this won't do." He tossed the knife into a puddle. Then he grabbed Spade by the hair and slammed him into the brick wall once enough to make the man's legs forget how to stand. Spade slid down, leaving a smear on the bricks. Rain washed it thinner. Rook crouched, produced a coil of cord, and wrapped Spade's wrists with the practiced speed of a man who had done it many times in many towns. Spade made a weak, furious noise. "Shout if you like," Rook said. "No one comes to this alley unless they're hunting something or hiding from it." He hauled Spade up by the collar and dragged him out into the wider street, where a pair of watchmen waited under a dripping awning, pretending not to be impressed. One watchman looked Spade up and down. "That him?" Rook gave a small shrug. "He's lighter than his reputation, but heavier than his morals. The watchman grunted and took the cord. "Bounty's 2 crowns." "2 crowns," Rook echoed and smiled. "A man could almost eat for that." "Not you," the watchman said, eyeing Rook's coat. "Ah," Rook replied. "Then I'll drink." He took the coins, tucked them away, and tipped his hat. As he turned, he caught snippets of the watchman's low talk behind him. "Always gets paid. Always gets his man. Doesn't flinch, neither." Rook walked off into the rain like he couldn't hear praise or warning. The 3 Nails Inn squatted against the street like a tired animal, its windows fogged, its sign creaking. Inside, warmth fought the damp and mostly lost. The common room was thick with smoke, sweat, and the mutter of people who didn't want to be noticed. Rook crossed it with the ease of someone who knew where trouble sat and how to nod at it without inviting it home. A serving girl pointed him to a back parlor. The door opened on a different world. Candlelight, clean wood, a rug that didn't smell of piss, a decanter of wine so dark it could have been blood if you'd only seen it in the wrong light, and, seated with perfect posture on a chair that looked too plain for her, a woman in red, not a bright, festive red, not a whore's red. This was the red of old velvet and deep bruises, rich, hungry, expensive. She wore a veil the color of fresh lacquer and gloves that hid every inch of her hands. A ribbon also red, but sharper, like a cut lay coiled on the table beside a small purse of stamped silver. Rook's first thought was that she didn't belong in this inn. His second thought was that she did, because the world belonged to people who could walk anywhere and make it seem natural. Her gaze found him, not flirtatious, not shy, measuring, like a jeweler appraising a blade. "Rudolf Kessel," she said. Her voice was smooth and low, with an accent that belonged to no single province cultured, but not soft. The name in her mouth sounded like she'd been savoring it. "Some call me Rook," he said. "That is a name for a predator," she replied. "Fitting." Rook took the chair opposite without being invited. The candles didn't flicker in the draught. He noticed that before he noticed he was watching her mouth. "You sent word," he said. "Pay up front. Discretion. No questions." "Do you always follow instructions so precisely?" she asked, and something in her tone made it feel like a compliment and a threat, braided together. "I follow coin," Rook said. "Instructions are negotiable." She smiled behind the veil. It was only a curve of lips, barely shown through the thin red, but it hit Rook like a hand at the small of his back. "Good," she murmured. "I prefer men who know their appetites." Rook's eyes went to the silver purse. "Who am I hunting?" "My kinsman," she said, as if the word tasted faintly unpleasant. "A runaway, a thief. He has taken something that belongs to my family." "And you'd rather hire a bounty hunter than the watch?" Rook said. "I would rather," she replied, "avoid complications." She slid the purse across the table. Rook didn't touch it yet. "And the heirloom?" She placed a small object beside the purse. A strip of red ribbon tied into a seal, waxed and stamped with a symbol that hurt to look at. If he stared too long, not painful. Exactly, but wrong. Like a word you couldn't quite remember, sitting on the tip of your mind. "This," she said, "a token. It ensures discretion. Those who see it will understand that the matter is private." Rook raised an eyebrow. "A ribbon ensures discretion?" "It does," she said simply, and for an instant Rook believed her with the unthinking certainty of a man accepting a drink from a trusted friend. Then his suspicions snapped back into place, and he hated himself a little for losing it even for a breath. He leaned forward. "Name, description, Last seen. She didn't hesitate. Garan Thule, a ferryman, lives near the crossing at Greyhook. He has a trinket, a locket, battered, unremarkable. Inside, a motif. Rook waited. A bird, she finished. Or something like one. Rook's smile returned. You're asking me to retrieve a ferryman and a locket. Yes, and you picked me because... He let the sentence hang baited. Her eyes glinted. Candlelight caught in something too bright. Because you are said to be hard to sway, she said, voice like velvet drawn over steel. And because you always get paid. Rook let his gaze drop just once to the red at her throat, the line of it disappearing into her dress. He didn't know if he wanted to bite it or kneel to it. Both impulses disgusted him, which made them stronger. You're very confident, he said. She tilted her head. Do you require me to beg, Master Kessel? The word master landed with weight. Rook's throat went dry. No, he said too quickly. He forced himself to laugh. No begging required. Good, she said. Then we have an agreement. Rook finally touched the purse. It felt heavier than it should, like the silver inside wanted to stay put. He ignored that. He took the ribbon seal too, and the moment his fingers closed around it, warmth spread up his hand, faint, intimate, like someone's breath against his skin. You'll bring me the locket, she said, and the man, if possible. If possible? Rook echoed. Her smile deepened. I do enjoy a man who understands necessity. Rook stood. I'll ride at first light. No, she said softly. Rook paused. She leaned forward, veil whispering. You'll ride tonight. Outside, thunder rolled like distant artillery. Rook found. He didn't argue. He hated that more than he hated the cold. Greyhook Crossing was not a place anyone visited by choice. The road narrowed and dipped into a low marsh, where fog lay thick as wool, swallowing trees and fence posts. The river itself ran dark and silent, broad enough to make you feel small, slow enough to make you uneasy. A crude toll structure leaned over the track like a tired arm. Somewhere in the mist, waterbirds cried, too sharp, too constant, as if they were repeating a warning. Rook found Garantuli's hut without trouble. That was the first wrongness. A ferryman didn't leave a trail a child could follow unless he wanted to be found or someone wanted him found. Yet every sign seemed arranged. A boot print in soft mud, a broken reed, a lantern wick stubbed out as if in haste. It felt like walking into a story someone else had already written. Rook dismounted beneath a bent willow and approached on foot, quiet as a sin. The hut sat on stilts, its door crooked, a small dock jutting into black water. A ferry rope ran across the river, vanishing into fog. The whole place looked like it had been built from regret. Rook knocked once. Silence! He knocked again and put a hand near his pistol. A shadow moved behind the thin curtain in the single window. Rook heard a scrape metal on wood and a whispered prayer that was half curse. Garan Thule, Rook called. Open the door. I'm here to talk. Something thumped inside, like a chair knocked over. Then a man's voice, thin, trembling. Who sent you? Rook could have lied. He could have said the watch. He could have said bandits. He could have said no one. But a strange impulse, like a hook behind his ribs, made him answer honestly. A lady, he said. In red. The door flew open. Garan Thule stood there with a short spear in his hands, its point wavering. He was broad-shouldered and river-strong, but his face was hollow with sleeplessness. his eyes fixed on Rook's coat, then on the ribbon seal tied to Rook's belt, and went wide with raw terror. "No," Garin breathed. No, she can't." Rook raised both hands, palms out. "Easy. I'm not here to kill you. I'm here to bring you in and take back what you stole." "I didn't steal anything," Garin snapped, voice cracking. "I didn't even know until it started, until the dreams." Rook took a step closer. "Then we can talk inside." Garin's spear tip bobbed dangerously. "Don't come closer." Rook stopped. The fog pressed in around them. The riverbirds cried again, and Rook realized they were crying in a pattern 3 short, 1 long like a signal. Garin swallowed hard and blurted, as if words could fend off fate. "Feather turns, water learns." He blinked, shocked at himself. Then he finished, voice dropping to a whimper. "When the red moon burns." Rook stared. "What in the hells is that?" Garin's gaze flicked past Rook, into the fog. "It's nothing. It's my mother used to say it. Don't listen. Don't." He jerked his chin toward the hut. "You want the locket? Fine. Take it. Just burn it. Hear me? Burn it. Throw it in the stove. Smash it. Burn it until it's ash." Rook's suspicion sharpened. "Why would I burn the thing I'm paid to retrieve?" "Because it's poison," Garin hissed. "Because it's a door. Because she..." He cut off, eyes fixed on the fog like he saw movement. Rook felt it too. A shift in the air. Not wind, but intent. Then came the sound, cracking branches, wet footfalls, low grunts that were almost words but not shaped for human mouths. Rook's hand went to his pistol. Shapes emerged from the mist. Not men. Too tall, too broad, moving with a loping confidence that spoke of muscle and hunger. Horned silhouettes, shaggy heads. The stink hit next animal, musk and old rot, and something sour like spilled ale left in a corpse's mouth. Beastmen. Rook counted quickly. 4, maybe 5. Hard to tell in the fog. Their crude weapons glinted. Cleavers, clubs, a rusted axe. Their eyes caught lantern light like coins at the bottom of a well. Garin made a strangled sound. "They found me." Rook's mind raced. Beastmen didn't raid a crossing by accident. They struck where the road was weak, where travelers were slow, where fear did most of the work. Yet the timing was too neat, like the world had waited for Rook to arrive. A horned brute bellowed and charged. Rook fired. The pistol barked loud in the fog. The shot struck the charging beastman in the chest and staggered it, but didn't stop it. It kept coming, momentum and rage carrying it forward. Rook swore and drew his blade, stepping aside at the last moment. Steel met crude iron with a jarring clang. Rook's arm numbed. The beastman swung again, wide and savage. Rook ducked, felt the rush of air, and drove his pommel into the creature's jaw. It reeled, more surprised than hurt. Garin jabbed with his spear, catching a second beastman in the shoulder. The beastman howled and ripped itself free, blood dark in the candlelight, and swung a club that shattered the spear shaft like dry wood. Garin stumbled backward, suddenly unarmed. His eyes met Rook's in naked desperation. Rook moved without thinking. He stepped between Garin and the next blow, blade raised. The club hit his forearm. Pain flashed white. Rook gritted his teeth, let the force carry his arm down, and used the motion to slash upward across the beastman's wrist. The creature's grip loosened. The club dropped with a wet thud into the mud. Rook kicked it away and drove his shoulder into the beastman's chest, ramming it back toward the dock. The boards groaned. The beastman grabbed at Rook's coat, claws tearing fabric. Rook twisted, trapped the beastman's arm, and drove his blade in under the ribs, not deep enough for a clean kill, but enough to make the thing roar and lose balance. They lurched together on the slick dock. The river lapped below, black and patient. Behind them, another beastman rushed Garin. Garin tried to dodge, slipped, and went down hard. The beastman raised its axe. Rook saw it. He could reach Garin, maybe, or he could finish his own fight, certain. In that heartbeat, the world narrowed to choices and consequences. He felt, absurdly, the warmth of the red ribbon against his side, like a hand urging him toward an answer. Rook snarled and did the reckless thing. He abandoned his own beastman and lunged toward Garin, grabbing the fallen ferryman by the collar and hauling him sideways. The axe crashed into the mud where Garin's head had been. Mud sprayed. Garin screamed. Rook slammed his boot into the beastman's knee. The joint buckled. The beastman dropped low with a grunt. Rook brought his blade down across its throat in a fast, brutal cut that stopped the roar mid-breath. The beastman toppled, twitching. Rook turned back too late. The first brute, the one he'd stabbed, had recovered. It surged forward and tackled Garin with both arms, driving him against the hut's wall. The wall splintered. Garin's head snapped back. His eyes rolled. Rook charged, but the beastman moved with sudden cunning. It shoved Garin away hard, and Garin fell backward off the dock. For an instant, Garin hung in the air, arms windmilling, face a mask of shock. Then he hit the river. The water swallowed him with a sound like a mouth closing. Rook froze. He could swim. He could dive. He could try. But the river was black, the current subtle, the fog thick, and beastmen still pressed in. Another shape moved in the mist, maybe more coming. The brute bellowed triumph and turned its attention back to Rook. Something in Rook's chest went cold and hard. "Fine," he said through clenched teeth. "Fine." He fired his second pistol shot point-blank into the beastman's face. The recoil jarred his wrist. The beastman staggered, hands flying up, and Rook stepped in to finish it with steel. When it fell heavy. The dock creaked under the weight. The remaining beastmen hesitated, their animal minds recalculating. Rook stood over the bodies, rain soaking him, blade dripping dark into the mud. He looked toward the river. No Garan, only ripples and fog. Rook breathed in, once, slow, and hated how much of his reaction was relief. He forced himself toward the hut. Inside, the place was a cramped, miserable nest of damp straw and river stink. A small stove sat cold. On a rough table lay a battered locket. Rook picked it up with 2 fingers. It was plain brass, dented, tarnished, the kind of trinket that meant something only because someone had held it through hard years. The clasp stuck. He pried it open. Inside was the motif, a spiral shape that suggested a bird only if you looked at it sideways, wings folding into a whirl, beak becoming a hook, feathers becoming lines that refused to stay still. Rook's eyes watered at once, not from emotion, from the symbol itself, like it was scraping the inside of his skull. He blinked hard, and for a heartbeat the spiral seemed to turn. He snapped the locket shut. Garin's words echoed in his mind. "Burn it." Rook stared at the cold stove. Then he thought of the red veil, the voice, the smile, the purse of silver that still weighed on his pocket like destiny. He pocketed the locket instead. Outside, the fog shifted. Somewhere in it, something laughed, quiet, distant, like it had all the time in the world. The ride back to Altdorf felt shorter than it should. The road seemed to fold for him, as if the night itself wanted him to arrive. By the time he returned to the 3 Nails Inn, the candles in the parlor were still lit, as if they'd never been allowed to gutter. Lady Celestine waited, unruffled, "You have it," she said, and it wasn't a question. Rook tossed the locket onto the table. It landed with a soft clink. The symbol inside seemed to itch even through the metal. She did not touch it. Instead, she produced a silk cloth white as bone and used it to lift the locket delicately, as if it were holy or filthy. "And my kinsman?" she asked, still calm. Rook's jaw tightened. "Dead." A pause, half a heartbeat. Then she sighed, almost wistful. "A pity." Rook watched her hands, watched the cloth, watched how careful she was not to let her skin meet the brass. "You didn't seem fond of him," Rook said. Her veiled eyes returned to him. "Fondness is a mortal habit." The way she said mortal made the word feel small, like an insect pinned to a board. Rook's throat went dry again. "What is this symbol?" he demanded, and heard the edge in his own voice. She tilted her head. "A family mark," she said smoothly. "An old one. Old things are often misunderstood." Rook swallowed, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "It makes my eyes water." "Does it?" she murmured, and leaned closer. "And yet you brought it to me." Rook didn't answer. She set the locket down and looked at him like he was a puzzle she enjoyed solving. Then she smiled. Not wide, not obvious, just enough. Rook felt it in his gut like the moment before a fall, weightless, thrilling, stupid, like stepping off a ledge and loving the drop. He left the parlor with the taste of her smile in his mouth and the sense that something had reached inside him and turned a key. Later, alone in his rented room, he took a charcoal stub and sketched the motif from memory on the inside of his palm. The spiral bird looked wrong even on skin. It was not any noble crest he'd seen in the courts or on the battlefield. It was not imperial heraldry, not Bretonnian, not Tilean, not from any decent lineage that wanted to be remembered. He stared at it until his eyes watered again, and in the wavering lines, he thought he saw it move just slightly, like a bird shifting its wings before flight. Rook clenched his fist and wiped the mark away, smearing it into a black bruise across his skin. Outside, rain kept falling. Inside, in the dark behind his eyes, something laughed softly and began to write the next part of the story. Chapter 2. Bloodline Ledger. Blue ink. The next day's rain had teeth. It came sideways off the rake's grey skin, needling into eyes and seams, turning roads into churned porridge and horse tracks into trenches. Rook rode anyway, coat collar high, hat brim low, the red ribbon seal tucked in an inner pocket like a brand he pretended wasn't there. He told himself he was leaving the river behind, but the river had followed him. He felt it in the way the world seemed to arrange itself around his route, signposts upright where they should have fallen, tollmen suddenly eager to accept coin without argument, and strangers who stepped out of doorways at just the right moment to point him along without being asked. Coincidence? He told himself. A bounty hunter lives on coincidence. And yet every time he closed his eyes, he heard her voice. Fondness is a mortal habit. On the third evening, he returned to the same inn parlor, as if pulled by a leash. The candles were already lit, the air already warm. Lady Celestine, already waiting, red veil, red gloves, the faint scent of roses bruised into iron. She didn't greet him like a client. She greeted him like a habit returning. "You did well," she said, and placed a fresh purse of stamped silver on the table. It hit the wood with that same wrong weight. Then another, then a third. 3 purses, 3 contracts. Rook kept his hands in his lap. "You're paying me for work I haven't done. I'm paying you to continue," she replied. It seems to help when you know you're appreciated. The words slid under his skin like warm liquor. She drew a folded sheet from inside her sleeve and laid it down between them, perfectly centered. 3 names, 3 places, written in a neat, old-fashioned hand. Joran Pike Hollevik, Marta Reen Dredgeford, Oskar Lynn Brackenmere. Runaways? Rook asked, staring at the ink as if it might jump. Thieves, Celestine corrected. Ungrateful. They've taken things not meant for them. Rook's mouth tightened. Like Garan Thule. A pause. Not long enough to be suspicion, long enough to be a choice. Yes, she said softly. Like Garan. Rook's fingers twitched. He forced stillness. And the pay doubles? It should, she said, as if explaining something to a child. The work is more delicate now. People talk when patterns form. What pattern? Rook asked, though he already felt it like a shape in fog, just out of reach. Celestine's gloved hand drifted, slow, to the red ribbon seal, and she nudged it toward him as if offering a sweet discretion, she reminded him. Rook swallowed and slid the paper toward himself. Tell me which one comes first, she smiled. Hollenwick, a small town, quiet, proper. It will suit you. How do you know what suits me? I pay attention, she said, and the simple sentence felt intimate in a way a stranger's words shouldn't. Rook stood. 3 towns, 3 names. I bring them back. You bring back, Celestine corrected, what they've stolen. Rook's gaze sharpened. And if they don't come quietly? Celestine's head tilted. Candlelight glowed in her eyes like something alive. Then you do what you're best at, she said. What you're known for. Rook picked up the first purse. It was heavier than the last, and not just with silver. He left, without bowing, without pleasantries, without admitting that he'd already decided to obey. Hollenwick sat like a scab on the road, tight, mean, and easily torn. Timbered houses leaned inward like conspirators. Chimneys belched damp smoke that couldn't quite climb into the sky. The townsfolk watched from behind shutters and half-open doors, faces pale in the gloom. A place that survived by keeping its head down and its mouth shut. Rook arrived at dusk and found the fencing tutor without needing to ask. That was the second wrongness. A man like Joran Pike should have been buried in local gossip, quiet admiration, grudges, the odd scandal. Yet the innkeeper didn't hesitate when Rook dropped the name. He just pointed with a ragged thumb toward the square. Teaches the merchant lads behind the guild hall, the man grunted. Polite sort, keeps to himself. Why? Rook slid a copper across the bar. Curiosity. The innkeeper snatched it like it might vanish. Curiosity gets you hung, stranger, Rook smiled. That's why I try to keep mine on a short leash. Behind the guild hall, the practice yard was an enclosed patch of trampled mud, lit by lanterns hung from hooks. 2 boys, soft hands, proud chins circled one another with blunted rapiers, their breath steaming. A man stood between them, correcting their feet and grip with gentle efficiency. Joran Pike wasn't old. Late 30s, perhaps. Hair tied back neatly, shirt plain but clean. His face had the calm patience of someone who had learned to keep violence inside rules. He looked up as Rook approached, and his expression shifted into polite caution. Can I help you? He asked. Rook stopped at the edge of the lantern light. Joran Pike? Yes. Rook didn't bother with a lie. Lies were for people who feared their own work. You're wanted. The boys froze, eyes wide. Joran's gaze flicked over Rook's coat, his stance, the way his right hand rested near his belt. By whom? Joran asked, voice steady. A lady, Rook said. In red. The calm cracked. Not much, just a tightening around the eyes, a quick swallow, a flicker of naked recognition. But it was enough. The lantern flame seemed to sharpen, its edge turning faintly blue for a heartbeat, and Rook's skin prickled as if someone had whispered behind him. Joran recovered fast. "I don't know any lady in red," he said. "You do," Rook replied. "Or you know why the phrase does." Joran's jaw flexed. "What phrase?" Rook stepped closer, letting the lantern light paint him in sharp lines. "Feather turns, water learns." Joran's face went bloodless. Rook finished it, softly, watching. "When the red moon burns." The fencing tutor's eyes flicked to the boys, then to the alley gate beyond the yard, then back to Rook. The rules inside him wavered. "Fight or flee. Go inside," he told the boys, voice clipped. Now, they needed no second instruction. They fled like rabbits. When the yard was empty, Joran set his practice blade on the rack and took down a real one thin, polished steel with a proper guard. He held it like a professional holds a tool. "You shouldn't say that," he said, and there was fear in the words now. "You shouldn't even know it." "You can tell me why," Rook said. Joran's mouth twitched, almost a smile, humor without joy. "Because then I'd be dead anyway." Rook's patience wore thin. "You're coming with me." Joran lifted his sword. "No." The lanterns hissed in the damp. The wind pushed at the yard walls. Somewhere, a church bell rang the hour like a warning. "Rook sachet. Don't make it messy." Joran's eyes hardened. Too late. He came in fast, faster than Garin had ever moved, faster than most men Rook had fought. The point snapped toward Rook's throat with clinical precision. Rook turned his head just enough to feel the cold whisper past his skin. The blade nicked his hat brim and sent wet felt flying. Rook drew his own weapon shorter, heavier, not a duelist's toy. A hunter's knife with a wide belly and a grim point. Joran angled away, using distance like a shield, letting the tip threaten every approach. He was calm now. The fear burned into focus. He circled with light feet, keeping Rook in the lantern light where the blade could see. Rook understood then. Joran didn't want to win. He wanted to leave. Rook feinted left and stepped right, trying to close. Joran's sword flicked, quick as a snake, and Rook felt pain bloom along his forearm where steel kissed flesh through wet cloth. Not deep. A warning. Rook's eyes narrowed. "You're good. I'm alive." Joran shot back. Rook shifted his grip, lowered his center, and moved like a street fighter instead of a gentleman. He threw a handful of mud with his left hand. The mud hit Joran's face and eyes. Joran cursed, blinked, and in that instant Rook was inside the reach of the rapier. Rook smashed his shoulder into Joran's chest, driving him back into the rack of practice blades. Wood splintered, metal clattered. Joran grunted, tried to bring the rapier up close, but Rook trapped the sword arm with his forearm and slammed his head forward, skull to nose. Joran staggered, dazed. Rook didn't let him recover. He hooked Joran's ankle with his boot and swept. Joran went down hard in the mud, breath punched out. Rook planted a knee near Joran's ribs and put the knife at his throat. "Enough," Rook said, rain dripping from his chin. Joran stared up at him, eyes bright with pain and something worse knowledge. His lips moved. "Don't," he rasped. "Don't take it. Don't give it to her." Rook's grip tightened. "What did you steal?" Joran's laugh came out broken. "My life back. That's what I stole." Rook searched him quickly, hands efficient. Under Joran's shirt, against his chest, he found a thin leather cord. A token hung there, small, dull metal, worn smooth by years of touch. Rook pulled it out. A spiral bird, barely recognizable, its lines seeming to coil around themselves. The lantern flame bent toward it, and for a moment the light's edge flickered blue. Rook's eyes watered instantly. Joran flinched away from the token as if it burned. "Please," he said, voice cracking. "Burn it. Throw it in a river. Smash it. Anything." Rook's mouth went dry. It was the same plea, the same terror, the same wrong symbol. Rook stared at Joran, knife still at his throat. "You've never met her?" Joran shook his head, mud streaking his hair. "Not in flesh, but I've seen her in dreams. We all have. A red veil, a smile, a promise that feels like drowning." Rook felt a cold thread slide behind his ribs. He stood, hauling Joran up by the collar. "You're coming with me." Joran's eyes flashed. He drove an elbow back, catching Rook in the gut. Rook grunted and loosened just enough for Joran to twist fast, desperate grabbing for his rapier again. Rook slammed him into the yard wall. Joran hit hard enough to rattle the boards. His sword clattered out of reach. Rook punched him in the side of the head. Once, twice, controlled violence, not rage. Joran's knees went weak. Rook caught him before he fell and dragged him toward the gate. The town watched as they passed. No one stepped forward. No one asked questions. The lanterns along the street seemed to burn with that same faintly blue edge, and shadows leaned toward Rook as if listening. At the inn, Rook shoved Joran into his room and tied him to a chair. Joran blinked awake through swelling. "You don't understand," he croaked. Rook poured himself a drink and didn't taste it. "Then explain." Joran swallowed. "We're not criminals. We're remnants. A line scattered like ash. Someone wanted us hidden. Someone wanted us alive. And now?" Rook asked. "And now something wants us dead," Joran whispered. "In the right order." The words sat in the room like damp rot. Rook's fingers tightened on the cup until it creaked. "Why me?" Joran's gaze lifted, and in it was pity sharp enough to cut. "Because you'll do it," he said. "Because you'll call it work." Rook stared at him until the candle guttered. Then he left the room and went looking for records. The town hall of Harlanwick was a squat building with a tiled roof and a door swollen with damp. Inside, it smelled of mold, ink, and old arguments. A clerk sat at a desk, writing by lamplight, quills scratching like a rat in the walls. She looked up when Rook entered, not startled, assessing. She was younger than Rook expected, hair pinned back tight, sleeves rolled up, ink stains on her fingers. Her eyes were sharp, tired, and wholly unimpressed by a stranger with a weapon-shaped posture. "Town hall's closed," she said. Rook leaned on the counter. "I only need to look at parish rolls." The clerk's eyes narrowed. "Parish rolls aren't for looking. They're for proving lineage, taxation, marriages, debts, inheritance. Which are you trying to steal?" Rook smiled thinly. "Information, same thing," she said. "Who are you?" Rook hesitated, then offered the closest thing to truth he had. "A man with a job." The clerk stood slowly. "A bounty hunter," she corrected, eyeing the mud on his boots and the way his coat sat around him like armor. "And you're asking about parish rolls on the same night Joran Pike gets dragged through town." Rook's smile vanished. "You know him." "Everyone knows him," she said. "He teaches children not to stab each other in alleys." Her gaze went harder. "So why are you hunting him?" Rook's hand drifted toward his belt, not as a threat, but as habit. "It's none of your business." "And yet," the clerk said, stepping closer, voice low, You look like a man who started to suspect his business might kill him, I think. Rook's eyes flicked to the ledger shelves behind her. What's your name? Magda Voss, she replied, and didn't offer a hand. And if you touch those books without permission, I'll scream until the watch comes, and they'll come gladly because they're bored. Rook studied her for a beat, then exhaled. I don't want trouble. Magda's laugh was quiet and humorless. Then you're in the wrong century. She moved behind the counter and took a key from her apron pocket, never taking her eyes off him. Tell me why you want parish rolls. Rook glanced at the door, the windows, the shadows. Something about this building felt wrong, like a mouth closed tight around secrets. Because, he said finally, a woman in red is paying me to find runaways, and the runaways all carry the same symbol. Magda's expression didn't change, but her pupils tightened. What symbol? Rook pulled out the spiral bird token he'd taken from Yoren and held it up. Magda didn't touch it. She didn't lean closer. She stared from a careful distance as if the thing might leap. Then she reached under her desk and produced a thick, leather-bound book with a cracked spine. This, she said, voice flat, is the town's record of births, marriages, and deaths. Rook frowned. I asked for parish rolls. You asked the wrong question, Magda replied. She opened the book. The pages looked normal at first. Columns, names, dates, the tidy work of decades. Then Rook leaned in and realized the ink was not steady. It shimmered slightly, like oil on water. Lines didn't quite sit still. A name he read once seemed to have different letters when he looked again. He blinked hard. His eyes watered. Magda turned a page. See that? She asked, tapping a line with her quill tip. Rook read, a child born 3 months before the listed marriage. He frowned. Mistake. Magda shook her head. There are dozens, and not just here. She flipped again. Names swapped between families. Women recorded as men. Men recorded as dead who are still alive. Whole branches rewritten. Rook felt cold creep up his spine. Why? Magda's eyes were dark. Because someone used this town like a hiding place, she said. And then someone else came along and tried to correct the hiding. Rook's throat tightened. The ink changes. Magda finished. When you look at it, when you don't, when the light shifts. Her voice lowered. I've tried to copy it. The copy is wrong the moment I finish. Rook stared at the ledger, feeling that same wrong pressure behind his eyes. This isn't. It is, Magda said sharply. It's exactly what it looks like when something that isn't human reaches into human lives and rearranges them like pieces on a board. Rook closed the ledger gently, as if it might bite. I need to. Stop, Magda snapped. You need to think. She leaned in, close enough that Rook could smell ink and tiredness on her. You're not dragging criminals. You're dragging people who don't know why they're being hunted. And you're doing it for a woman whose name you probably don't know. Rook's jaw flexed. Magda watched him, like she was weighing his soul for market value. Where is Yoren? Rook's silence was answer enough. Magda exhaled. Idiot. Rook bristled. Careful. Magda's eyes flicked to his knife, then back to his face without fear. You're not going to kill me, she said. You need someone who can read the books without going blind. Rook felt the truth of it settle like a stone. Outside, thunder rolled, and inside, somewhere in the building, a candle flame flickered blue. Night found Rook back in his room, Joran tied and sleeping fitfully. Magda's ledger burned scarred into his thoughts. He sat on the edge of the bed, boots still on, staring at the spiral bird token in his palm. He should have thrown it into the stove. He didn't. The candle on the table burned steady until it didn't. Its flame pinched narrow and for a heartbeat edged blue. The room's shadows leaned the wrong way, toward the door instead of away from it. Then the air warmed. Rook didn't hear the latch. He just felt her. Lady Celestine stood inside his room as if she'd always been there, red veil catching the candlelight, gloves immaculate, rain nowhere on her. Rook's hand went to his pistol out of reflex. The pistol wasn't there. He blinked. He was sure it had been. Celestine tilted her head. "Still so cautious," she murmured. "It's one of your charms." "How did you get in?" Rook demanded. Celestine's gaze flicked past him to the chair where Joran Pike slept bound. A slow smile curved behind the veil. "You've been busy," she said. "I do admire diligence." Rook stood, pulse hammering. "He says he's never met you." "Of course not," Celestine replied. "He's a small life. Small lives don't understand the hands that move them." Rook's voice went low. "He begged me to burn the token." Celestine glided closer. The candle flame steadied, as if afraid to misbehave in her presence. "They always beg," she said. "When rot is exposed, it pleads to remain hidden." Rook's jaw tightened. "Rot!" Celestine's gloved hand lifted and brushed the edge of Rook's collar, not quite touching skin. The gesture was intimate without being crude, and somehow that was worse. "They are tainted branches," she whispered. "Old corruption, old bargains. The realm suffers for bloodlines like theirs, even diluted, even ignorant. If you cut them away, you save lives you'll never meet." Rook's stomach turned. "You're talking about killing them?" Celestine's eyes softened, almost tender. "I'm talking about mercy," she said. "For the realm, for you, for them. If you insist on pity." Rook's breath came harsh. "And the pay doubling? That's mercy too?" Celestine laughed quietly. "That's encouragement." She stepped closer, close enough that Rook could see the curve of her mouth through the veil, close enough that his skin remembered warmth. Her voice dropped. "You did so well at the river," she said. "You felt necessity, and you obeyed it." Rook's throat tightened. "Garen died." "A pity," Celestine repeated, and the words sounded rehearsed, then softer. "But you brought me what mattered." Rook forced himself to look away, toward the small mirror above the wash basin. In it, Celestine's reflection stood behind him. Her smile was there. Then, a heartbeat later, it widened after her real mouth had already moved. Rook's blood went cold. He watched, frozen, as the reflection's eyes caught the candlelight and threw it back in a sharp, predatory gleam like a cat watching a mouse. Rook turned sharply. Celestine's veil hid the shape of her smile, but he could feel it. "I worry," she murmured, as if sharing a secret, "that you think too much." Rook's fists clenched. "Get out!" Celestine's gloved hand rose, and for a moment it hovered near his cheek like a lover's touch. "Soon," she promised. "You have 3 names, Rook. 3 towns. 3 chances to prove you are the man I chose." Her voice turned sweet, almost playful. "And then you'll come back to me because you'll want to." The candle flame edged blue again. Celestine was gone. No footfall, no draft, no door. Just the room, the bound man snoring softly, and Rook's pulse roaring in his ears like a river in flood. He sat down hard on the bed and stared at his hands until dawn bled thin and grey into the window. Sleep took him in the end, the way a mugger takes a drunk, sudden, rough, and without permission. He dreamed of a grand ballroom with floors polished like black glass and chandeliers dripping candlelight. Music played that sounded almost human. Almost. People danced in circles, their masks shining. Every face that turned toward him was his grin, his eyes, his scars, his expressions worn by strangers like borrowed clothes. They moved with his posture, his swagger, his little mannerisms, each one a mockery of self. Rook pushed through them, panic rising, trying to find the exit, trying to find anything that wasn't him. Then he saw her. Celestine stood at the far end of the hall, red veil glowing like a wound in candlelight. She lifted a hand and beckoned. Rook stepped toward her, unable to stop, shoes sliding over the glossy floor. As he drew closer, the music warped. The air grew thick, sweet, suffocating. Celestine's veil fluttered as if in a wind that didn't touch the rest of the room, and beneath it, just for an instant, Rook saw not lips, not teeth as men had them, but a gleam of needle-white points arranged in a grin that promised pleasure and ruin in the same breath. He tried to back away. The dancers closed in, all wearing his face, all smiling. Celestine's eyes shone like a predator's in the dark. "Dance," she whispered, and the ballroom swallowed him. Chapter 3. The Carnival of False Saints. The road to Dredgeford ran through wet fields and lonely copses where crows watched like magistrates. The ruts were deep enough to swallow a boot, the puddles black enough to hide a body, and the wind carried the smell of peat smoke and something faintly sweet like fruit left too long in a cellar. Rook rode with Magda Voss in the lee of a cart that didn't belong to either of them. She'd insisted on coming with the stubborn confidence of a woman who had seen numbers lie on paper and decided she'd rather face whatever made them lie than pretend it was a clerical error. Joran Pike had vanished 2 nights ago. Not escaped, Rook had checked his knots. Not freed, no cut cord, no forced door. He'd simply been gone, leaving only a damp chair imprint and a faint smear of blue-edged candle soot on the sill. Rook didn't speak about it, and Magda didn't ask twice. They both carried the silence like a weapon. They learned the next runaway wasn't in a house or a dockside shack. She was hidden in motion. A travelling carnival had rolled into the marshlands near Dredgeford, bright as a bruise of paint on rotten skin. The townsfolk were already calling it the Procession of Saints because in the old world, anything that promised relief from hunger, sickness, and fear got called holy before it got called dangerous. Rook saw the tents before he heard the music. Striped canvas rose from a muddy meadow like mushrooms after rain, reds, whites, and golds garish against the grey sky. Lantern strings hung between poles, swaying, their glass chimneys fogged and sweating. A wooden stage had been built on wagons. Painted boards showed smiling saints with halos like sunbursts, their eyes too large, their teeth too white, and the sound pipes and drums, laughter too loud, hawkers promising cures and blessings, and a glimpse of paradise for the price of a copper. Magda tugged her hood tighter. "This is wrong," she said, not softly. Rook's gaze moved over the crowd. Farmers with cracked hands, dock labourers with rope burns, half-starved children with snotty noses, a soldier in a patched coat, leaning on a crutch, a midwife with a basket, people who had nothing, lured by the promise of something. "It's a fair," Rook said, though his mouth didn't believe it. Magda's eyes flicked to him. "You smell it too." He did. Beneath the fried onions and cheap ale and damp wool, there was a sharper scent ozone, like storm air trapped in a bottle, and ink. Not fresh ink, old ink, the kind that lived in ledgers and contracts and signatures. They pushed into the crowd. A barker in a painted mask shoved a pamphlet at Rook. On it, a saint in gold robes held a torch. The torch flame was drawn with a faint blue outline. Rook dropped the pamphlet as if it burned. He found Father Heller by accident, or by whatever passed for accident now. The priest stood at the edge of the meadow, outside the lantern glow, where the mud turned to reeds. His cassock was stained, his boots were split, his hair was uncut, and stubble shadowed his jaw like he'd forgotten what it meant to be clean. He held a hammer at his belt the way another man might hold a knife, and his eyes had the hard, hollow look of someone who'd prayed for answers and got laughter back. He watched the carnival like it was a trap he couldn't afford to spring and couldn't afford to leave. When Rook and Magda drew near, the priest's hand went to his hammer without drama. "Don't," Rook said, raising a palm. "We're not with them." The priest's gaze swept over Rook, then over Magda, lingering on her ink-stained fingers, her steady posture. "Everyone's with them," he muttered. "Some just don't know it yet." Magda stepped forward. "Father Heller?" His eyes narrowed. "Who's asking?" "A woman who can read," she said, "and a man who keeps finding the same symbol." Rook drew the spiral bird token from inside his coat, holding it up without letting the priest touch. The metal looked dull in the grey daylight, but the lines of the motif seemed to shift if you stared too long. Father Heller's face tightened as if he'd bitten something sour. "Where did you get that?" he asked, voice turning sharp. "From people your carnival friends call thieves," Rook said. "People who beg me to burn it." Heller's jaw worked. "That isn't a family crest," he said. "It's a heresy mark. Old. Older than most of the lies men tell themselves to sleep at night." Magda's voice came low. "What kind of heresy?" Heller stared at the tents, at the painted saints, at the bright lanterns. "The kind that changes," he said. "The kind that smiles when you think you've understood it." Rook's throat tightened. "Tzeentch." The priest's eyes flicked to him, measuring. "Don't say that name loudly," he hissed. "Not near places like this. Names are hooks." Magda swallowed. "Why is it here?" Heller's laughter was a dry cough. "Why is rotten meat?" he said. "Because it feeds?" He leaned closer, lowering his voice until it was almost lost beneath the pipes. "Some bloodlines don't die," he said. "They shed skins. They hide in new names, new towns, new ledgers. They forget what they are, and that's the only mercy they get." Rook felt the red ribbon seal in his pocket like a brand against his ribs. "We're looking for a midwife," he said. "Beloved, necessary, kind." Heller's expression darkened. "Martyr reign," he murmured. "You're too late." Magda's eyes widened. "You know her?" "I know who's missing," Heller snapped. 3 women in 3 weeks, 1 boy, a peddler. Folk vanish and the town says wolves or bandits, because that's easier than admitting the world is hungry. Rook's gaze moved back to the carnival. "You think she's in there?" Heller's grip tightened on his hammer. "I think she's been invited," he said. "And people don't walk away from invitations like that. Not when the invitation promises miracles. They push deeper into the fair. Everywhere, saints stared down from painted boards, saint of wounds, saint of lost children, saint of fortune, each one a cheap icon with a grin too wide. A stall sold holy water in cloudy bottles. Another sold charms made of bone, feathers, and bits of blue glass. A man with a shaved scalp and tattoos like crawling vines offered blessings for a penny and curses for 2. Rook's eyes kept catching flickers of blue at the edges of flame lantern light haloed in faint sapphire, as if the fire remembered another color. A tent near the center was draped in crimson. A sign read, "Mother's Mercy Healing, Birth Blessings." Magda stopped so abruptly Rook nearly collided with her. "She's there," Magda whispered, not because she knew, but because the knowledge was written in the air. The crowd flowed around them like water around stones. Rook's hand slid toward his blade. "Stay behind me." Magda's expression hardened. "Don't pretend you can protect me," she murmured. "Just don't pretend you're not protecting yourself." Inside the tent, the air was warm and thick with herbs. A woman stood behind a curtain of beads, hands moving with practiced gentleness over a young mother's swollen belly. Her hair was streaked with gray. Her face was lined by laughter and worry. Her eyes were tired but kind. A real kind, not a painted saint's. Marta Rain looked up as they entered, and her smile faltered, not fear recognition. Rook felt his stomach tighten. "Marta Rain," she set her hands down slowly, as if she didn't want to startle the baby inside the mother. "Who's asking?" she said, voice steady. Rook didn't answer. He didn't have to. Marta's gaze went to Magda, then to Rook, and finally to the inside of Rook's coat, where the spiral bird token pressed against cloth. Her eyes widened with a flash of old terror. "Oh," she whispered. "It's come for me, too." Magda stepped forward. "We're not," she began, then stopped because the lie didn't fit. "We're trying to understand." Marta gave a small, broken laugh. "Understanding is a luxury," she said. "The ones who understood died first." Rook's voice went low. "A woman in red hired me." Marta flinched as if slapped. The beads behind her rattled with the motion. "She's not a woman," Marta whispered, and crossed herself with shaking fingers. "She's a story men tell when they want to pretend desire isn't dangerous." Rook's jaw clenched. "Do you know the phrase?" Marta's eyes closed. When she spoke, it sounded like she was reciting a lullaby through her teeth. "Feather turns, water learns," she began, and her voice broke. "When the red moon burns." The young mother on the cot stirred, confused, sensing fear. Marta bent, smoothing the woman's hair, masking her panic behind practiced care. "Go," she murmured to the mother. "Go out. Fresh air. It's too hot in here." The woman stumbled away, clutching her belly. As soon as the mother was gone, Marta drew a cord from beneath her blouse. Hanging from it was not a metal token like Joran's, but a small carved charm of wood, worn smooth. On one side, a spiral bird. On the other, a rough symbol like an eye. "This keeps the nightmares away," Marta said. "My grandmother gave it to me. She said it was protection. She said if I ever heard that phrase from a stranger, I should run or burn or pray until my throat bled." Magda's eyes flicked to the charm. "Your grandmother, what was her name?" Marta swallowed. "It changed," she said. "It always changed." Rook felt cold anger rise. "You're not criminals," he said, more to himself than to her. "You're markers." Magda's voice tightened. "They're descendants," she said. "A hidden line. The ledger isn't just corrupted, it's curated." Rook glanced at her. Magda's eyes were bright with grim certainty. "I've been thinking," she said. "The rewritten births, the swap names, it's not random, it's concealment. Someone once scattered a bloodline so thin it could pass as ordinary, so it could survive." Marta's face went pale. "Bloodline," she whispered, and the word, tasted like poison. Magda stepped closer, voice trembling with the weight of the idea. "And now someone is culling it," she said. "Not because your blood is power by itself, because it's a key. Pieces gathered in sequence. A ritual that needs endpoints." Rook's mouth went dry. He saw Garen's fall into black water. Joren's vanished chair. The pattern wasn't just forming, it was tightening. Behind him, the tense lantern flame flickered blue, and the air warmed. Rook turned. Lady Celestine stood in the tent's entrance, red veil shining like a fresh wound in lamplight. She didn't look wet from rain or travel. She didn't look like she'd walked through a crowd. She looked like she'd stepped out of the idea of herself. Marta made a sound, half prayer, half sob, and backed away. Magda's hand went to her pocket where she kept a small knife. It looked pitiful now, like a child's toy. Rook's fingers flexed. "How did you—" Celestine lifted one gloved hand and silenced the question with the ease of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "My Rook," she murmured, and the possessive made Rook's skin crawl and heat at once. "You've been busy." Rook planted himself between her and Marta. "This ends," he said. Celestine's head tilted. "Ends?" she echoed, amused. "No, this begins." A voice shifted for a single breath, just one, and the noble softness peeled away like a glove stripped off. Underneath was something that sounded like silk dragged across broken glass. "You thought you were hunting thieves," she said, and the words were almost a caress. "You thought you were a man doing work." Rook's jaw clenched. "I am." Celestine's laughter was low and delighted. "You're a man making my selections look ordinary," she purred. "A bounty hunter doing what bounty hunters do. No torches, no witch hunters, no suspicious patterns, just a professional with a list." Magda's voice cut in, sharp. "You're using him." Celestine's gaze flicked to Magda like a knife evaluating meat. "I am rewarding him," she corrected. "There is a difference mortals cling to." Rook's stomach twisted. "What do you want from them?" Celestine's eyes glinted. "Keys," she whispered. "Threads, notes in a song you cannot hear. When gathered properly, they open a door." Marta's voice shook. "I didn't ask to be a key." Celestine's head turned toward Marta, and the red veil seemed to deepen in color. "None of you asked," she said almost gently. "That's what makes it divine." Rook lunged. He didn't know if he meant to grab Celestine, strike her, or simply prove to himself that she was flesh. His hand shot out and met nothing. Not air, not emptiness. Something like warm resistance, as if he'd pushed against a curtain made of breath and perfume. The candle flame flared blue. Shadows leaned toward his reaching hand. Celestine stepped aside with impossible grace, avoiding the attack as if she'd watched it happen already. "Careful," she murmured. "You bruise so easily." Rook snarled, drew his blade, and the tent seemed to tilt. Not physically. Reality itself skewed, like the world had slipped on grease. Outside, the carnival's music shrieked into a higher pitch. The laughter sharpened. The lanterns flared, their flames ringing with blue like a halo of poison. Then the fair turned inside out. The saints' painted faces twisted in the corners of Rook's vision, their grins stretching too wide. A performer on the stage dressed as a saint raised his arms, and thick blue wax began to run from his painted eyes in slow, obscene tears. The crowd gasped, then cheered, mistaking horror for miracle. Jugglers in the open square tossed knives that didn't fall. The blades hovered, spinning lazily, points aimed wherever their unseen master willed. Children laughed and ran beneath them. A fortune-teller in a hood leaned from her booth, and spoke in Rook's voice. "You'll do it. You'll do it. You'll do it." Rook's pulse hammered. He shoved Marta toward Magda. "Get her out," he barked. "Now." Magda grabbed Marta's arm. Marta resisted, eyes fixed on Celestine like a rabbit watching a fox. "I can't run," Marta choked. "It follows," Rook snapped. "Then crawl." They surged toward the tent flap, and the crowd outside surged too, but not with joy now. Panic rippled through them like wind through wheat. People screamed as the hovering knives dipped, slashing close enough to cut hair and cloth. A man fell with a cry, clutching his shoulder where steel had kissed him. A child shrieked as blue wax splattered across her hands, sizzling like hot fat. Something in the fog beyond the meadow bellowed. Beastmen again, drawn by noise, drawn by scent, drawn by the carnival's wrongness, like flies to rot. They burst into the outer ring of tents with crude weapons raised, horns slick with rain, eyes bright with murder. The crowd stampeded. Bodies collided, tripped, fell. Boots crushed fingers. A woman screamed as she disappeared under a wave of panicking men. Rook threw himself into the chaos, not out of heroism, but because movement was the only way to survive. A beastman lunged at him with a cleaver. Rook ducked and drove his shoulder into its gut, slamming it back into a tent pole. Canvas tore, lantern glass shattered, blue flames spilled onto the mud and danced there as if it enjoyed the taste. Rook rose with his blade and struck fast, brutal, efficient, forcing the beastman down with blows that left it staggering and howling. He didn't linger to admire his work. Another beastman swung a club at his head. Rook caught the strike on his forearm and felt pain flare, then rammed his knife hilt into the creature's jaw. Teeth cracked. The beastman reeled. Rook shoved it into the stampeding crowd, where it vanished beneath screaming bodies. He turned, searching Magda, Marta. He spotted them near the saint's stage, pushing through bodies. Marta half stumbling, Magda swearing like a dockhand. Celestine stood at the edge of the square, untouched by panic, her red veil a calm wound amid the madness. She watched Rook with the indulgent satisfaction of a gambler watching her chosen horse run. Rook felt sick. He fought his way to Magda and Marta, slashing at hands that grabbed, shoving men aside, shouldering through fear. He reached them and caught Marta by the wrist. "Marta Rain," he said harshly, "listen to me." Her eyes were wide, wet. "Don't," she begged. "Don't make me a part of it." Rook's throat tightened. He could feel the pattern tightening too, like a noose, like a script. If he killed her, he completed the cut. He advanced Celestine's ritual. He proved her right. If he saved her, he defied the script, yet Celestine had already said even defiance pleased her. Even rebellion could be bait. Rook stared at Marta's face, kind, lined, real. A woman who had caught babies and buried mothers. A woman who smelled of herbs and sweat and worry, not perfume and lies. His grip loosened. "Magda," he snapped, voice raw. "If I tell you to run, you run." Magda's eyes flashed. "If you think I'm leaving you," Rook cut her off. "Run." He yanked his coat open, tore a strip of cloth from the lining, and shoved it into Marta's hands. "Wrap this around your neck," he growled. "Hide the charm. Hide the token. Don't let anyone see it." Marta fumbled, crying, but obeyed. Rook turned and saw a beastman barreling toward them, cleaver raised. He stepped into its path, blade up. The beastman swung. Rook met it, steel ringing against crude iron, his arms shuddering under the impact. He twisted, used the beast's momentum against it, and drove it sideways into a vendor stall. Bottles shattered, holy water sprayed, stinking of cheap spirits. Blue flame flared along the spilled liquid like it had been waiting. The beastman roared, blinded, and Rook struck again and again, forcing it down until it stopped moving. He didn't look at what he'd done. He couldn't afford to. "Go!" he shouted at Magda and Marta. Magda grabbed Marta and shoved her through a gap in the crowd toward the reeds at the meadow edge. Rook followed, guarding their backs, cutting down anything that got too close, feeling the carnival's wrongness pressing on him like hands. Behind them, Celestine's laughter rose above the screams, soft, delighted, patient. They reached the reeds just as the fair's lanterns flared blue all at once, bathing the mud in sickly light. For a moment, the world looked like an ink blot. Then it snapped back almost. The music died. The hovering knives clattered to the ground. The saints' painted faces resumed their fixed smiles. The crowd's panic became confusion, then denial. People began to mutter about tricks and bandits and bad ale. The beastmen were gone into the fog, dragging something heavy that left a trail in the mud. Rook's chest heaved. His forearm throbbed where the club had struck. His hands shook with adrenaline and fury. Marta sobbed quietly, bent over, clutching her charm like a drowning woman clinging to driftwood. Magda kept a grip on her shoulder, steady as iron. Father Heller appeared from the reeds like he'd been made of marsh mist. His cassock was torn now. His face was grim. "You didn't kill her," he said. "Not a question, an assessment?" Rook's voice was hoarse. "Not tonight." Heller's eyes flicked toward the carnival, where lanterns now burned ordinary yellow, pretending the blue had never been. "It won't stop," he said. "Whether you cut the branch or hide it, it'll twist the tree until it gets what it wants." Magda swallowed. "What does it want?" Heller reached inside his cassock and drew out a folded map, old parchment, stained, creased, marked with charcoal and ink. He opened it with hands that shook slightly from cold or anger. On it were crude sketches of shrines, standing stones, old chapels half swallowed by forest. Lines connected them in a path that made Rook's eyes hurt when he followed it. "It's a pilgrimage," Heller said. "A pattern, a geometry of sin." He jabbed a finger at the final mark, a ruin drawn with heavy strokes, ringed by jagged symbols. "Where is that?" Rook asked, though he already felt the answer like a bruise. Heller's mouth twisted. "A forgotten place," he said. "Old stones that shouldn't still be standing. A chapel that fell before your grandfather's grandfather was born. The locals don't go near it. The birds don't fly over it." Rook stared at the mark. The spiral bird token in his pocket felt heavier. Heller's eyes lifted to meet his. "Your killings," he said, voice like gravel. "Point there." Magda's voice tightened. "The final descendant," Heller nodded once. "That's where the ritual blooms." Rook looked back toward the carnival. Somewhere in its lights and laughter and denial, he felt Celestine's attention like a hand on the back of his neck. He realized, with a cold clarity, that she didn't care whether he killed Marta or saved her. She cared that he moved, that he played his part. And the worst of it, the rot under the fear, was that some traitorous part of Rook still remembered her voice like a kiss, and wondered what it would feel like to stop fighting and simply fall. Chapter 4. The Red Door in the Ruin. The mill sat where the road gave up, pretending it was safe. Brackenmere's water wheel turned with a slow, exhausted groan, lifting black river water and dropping it back into the world as foam and stink. The air tasted of wet grain, old wood, and a sour tang of mold that clung to the lungs like a debt. Beyond the mill yard, ancient stones rose from the earth in a half-buried ring, weathered monoliths, lichen slick, carved with shallow spirals that seemed harmless until you tried to count the lines and your eyes refused to agree on where they started. Rook watched the place from the tree line with Magda and Father Heller crouched beside him, mud soaking through their knees. "It's an ordinary mill," Magda whispered, as if saying it loudly might turn it into something else. "That's how it hides," Heller rasped. His voice had been sanded down by sleepless nights and cheap spirits. He looked smaller than a priest ought to look, his cassock a ragged banner of failure, but his eyes were hard as hammered nails. "Ordinary is the best disguise in this world. It's why the gods love it so much." Rook's hand rested on the butt of his pistol, thumb brushing the worn metal like a habit he couldn't quit. In his coat, the spiral bird tokens taken from Garen's locket, from Joran's cord, from Marta's charm which he'd given willingly, shaking after a night of whispered prayers and desperate bargains, pressed against him as if trying to climb through cloth and into his skin. Even bundled together, they didn't feel like objects. They felt like intention. "You said he's a mill owner," Rook murmured. Magda nodded. "Oscar Lynn. Guild stamp on his sacks. Taxes paid on time. No known debts. No known enemies." She swallowed. "No reason to be on your list." "That's the reason," Heller muttered. "The last clean thread. The last quiet heartbeat. They always pick the ones who don't understand what they're carrying." Rook's eyes tracked the yard. A man moved between stacked flour sacks, shoulders hunched, working with the slow diligence of someone who'd been awake too long. He stopped often, looking over his shoulder as if he expected to see something standing behind him. Nightmares made men twitchy. Nightmares made men pray. Nightmares made men easy to point. Oscar Lynn wiped his hands on his apron and glanced toward the ancient stones. His gaze lingered there, fear, confusion, something like recognition he didn't know he had. Then he flinched, hard, as if something had whispered his name. Rook felt the hair on his arms rise. "The air's wrong," Magda breathed. Heller's mouth tightened. "It's close," he said. "The ruin's pulling, like a wound that wants a finger in it." Rook stood. Mud suctioned at his boots like hands trying to keep him. He ignored it. "Stay here," he told Magda. Magda's eyes flashed. "Don't stay," Rook repeated, and there was enough steel in his voice to make it a command. He didn't trust himself to explain why. He walked down the slope into the mill yard. Oscar saw him and stiffened, then tried to smooth his expression into polite confusion. A man who lived by commerce learned to smile through unease. "Can I help you?" Oscar called, voice a little too loud. Rook stopped at a respectful distance, palms open. "Oscar Lynn?" Oscar's eyes darted to the trees, to the stones, to the river. "Yes, who's asking?" Rook lied for once. "Not well. A friend." Oscar's face twitched. "I don't have friends," he said, and tried to laugh. It came out thin. "Not ones who arrive like that." Rook stepped closer. "You've been having dreams." Oscar's breath caught. His hand went to his chest, to something hidden under his shirt. Rook's gaze followed. A cord. A charm. A token pressed against skin. Oscar's voice cracked. "How do you—" Rook lowered his voice. "There's a woman in red." Oscar went white as flour. "No," he whispered. "No, no, don't say." Rook felt it then, the hook behind his ribs, the warm pressure of the red ribbon seal in his inner pocket, the subtle nudge of fate trying to steer him into the exact words. He spoke them anyway, because part of him wanted to prove he could choose. "Feather turns," Rook said, slow. "Water learns." Oscar's lips moved with him, as if the phrase lived in his bones. His eyes were wet, shining with panic. "When the red moon burns," Oscar finished, and the words landed in the air like a nail struck into wood. The world tightened, the water wheel groaned louder, the ancient stones seemed to lean, the river's surface shivered, reflecting a sky that wasn't there. Oscar stumbled back, clutching his shirt. "I didn't do anything," he pleaded, voice ragged. I'm just a miller. I wake up and I see a ballroom full of faces. I hear laughter under my bed." He swallowed hard. I wanted to stop. Rook's jaw clenched. "Then come with me." Oscar's eyes flicked to the trees again, like he expected someone to step out. "Where?" Rook glanced toward the ring of stones. Beyond them, a hill rose, and on the far slope, ivy-choked ruins sat like broken teeth against the grey. Hela had marked it on the map with thick charcoal strokes. A chapel, a watchtower, a place the world had tried to forget and failed. "The ruin," Rook said. Oscar made a sound between a sob and a laugh. "I can't," he whispered. "If I go there, I'll die." Rook's gaze hardened. "If you stay, you'll die too." As if summoned by the word, hooves thundered on the road. Road wardens, 5 of them, came over the rise in muddy cloaks, crossbows raised. Their sergeant rode in front, face set in righteous suspicion. They saw Rook, armed, speaking to a trembling guildman near ancient stones. In the old world, that was enough to make men choose a story and load it into their weapons. "Hold!" the sergeant shouted. "In Sigmar's name, drop the blade." Rook turned slowly, hands still open. "He's not your target." The sergeant's eyes narrowed. "And who are you to say what's mine?" Rook almost smiled. It would have been easier if this were just bandits, just beastmen, just men with greed and teeth. Those he understood. This was worse. Lawful violence, looking for a reason. Before Rook could speak, the ancient stones flared, not with light, not exactly, with attention. The spirals carved into them seemed to deepen, lines twisting subtly when no one looked straight at them. The air tasted suddenly of copper and sweet wine, sharp and cloying at once. Lanternless shadows pooled at the base of the stones as if the day had decided it was tired. Oscar screamed. Something under his shirt burned hot enough that steam rose in the damp air. Rook lunged toward him, grabbing his wrist. "Run!" But Oscar's feet wouldn't obey. The tokens in Rook's coat thrummed no sound, but a vibration felt in the bones. The locket's brass grew warm. The spiral bird marks aligned like teeth in a lock. The road wardens shouted again, but their voices sounded far away, as if spoken through thick glass. And then the ruin answered. Blue fire crawled along the broken chapel stones on the hill, tracing cracks and carvings that hadn't been visible a moment before. It moved like liquid thought, clinging to ivy, sliding under moss, lighting the spiral sigils with a sickly halo. Reality thinned. The air shimmered. Colors sharpened at the edges and dulled in the center. Rook's breath came out tasting like pennies and spoiled fruit. Magda ran down from the tree line, swearing, hauling Father Hela with her. "Rook!" she shouted. "It's starting!" Hela's eyes were wide, fixed on the blue fire like it was a scripture written in pain. "The door!" he rasped. "It's making a door!" The road wardens saw it too. Their righteous certainty faltered, then snapped into fear. "Witchery!" someone shouted. "Burn it!" And from the carnival of fear, the cultists emerged, not in robes, not in grand theatrics, in work clothes, in patched coats, in faces Rook had passed on roads and ignored ordinary men and women whose eyes now shone with the fever of certainty. They moved with purpose, flowing toward the stones, toward Oscar, toward the ruin, murmuring the nonsense couplet like a hymn. Feather turns, water learns. Their voices layered, became a rhythm, became a lock turning. Rook shoved Oscar behind him and drew his blade. The first cultist came in with a wood axe raised high, mouth stretched in a smile that didn't belong on a human face. Rook stepped inside the swing, caught the haft with his left forearm, and slammed his pommel into the cultist's throat. The man folded with a choking gasp. Rook drove him down into the mud and moved on before the body had finished twitching. A second cultist grabbed Rook's coat from behind, trying to drag him down. Rook spun, hooked the man's wrist, and wrenched hard enough to make tendons scream. The cultist yelped, and Rook used the opening to drive a knee into his gut. The man doubled over. Rook shoved his face into the edge of a stone and heard the dull crack of bone. The road wardens fired. Bolts hissed through wet air. One cultist went down, pinned through the shoulder to a sack of grain, screaming more in joy than pain. Another bolt took a cultist in the leg. He dragged himself forward anyway, hands clawing at mud, chanting. Magda grabbed Oscar by the arm. "Move!" she hissed. "Move, you idiot!" Oscar stumbled, sobbing, eyes unfocused, as if the world had become too loud to understand. Rook fired his pistol into a knot of cultists, not aiming for death but for space shock, disruption, a gap in the tide. They recoiled, then surged again. Then the illusions broke open. A man stepped out of the fog near the stones wearing Rook's coat and Rook's hat, his face Rook's face but wrong around the eyes, like a mask pulled too tight. He smiled with Rook's mouth. "Deliver him," the false Rook said in Rook's voice. "You know you want to." Rook felt his stomach drop. His own thoughts echoed back at him like mockery. More mirrored versions appeared, one behind a road warden, one on the hill by the ruin, one perched impossibly on a standing stone. Each wore his face, each whispered with his voice, each offered a different lie, wrapped in his own familiar tone. "You're a hunter," one murmured. "Do the job. You're tired," another purred. "Let go." "She's waiting," a third said softly. "She's always been waiting." The blue fire brightened, and Lady Celestine arrived. She didn't walk into the yard. She simply was standing beside the stones, red veil unmoved by wind, red gown untouched by mud. The chaos bent around her like a river around a pillar. Cultists turned toward her with worshipful hunger. Road wardens flinched back, their faith suddenly feeling very small. Rook's breath caught. Her glamour hit like a fist wrapped in velvet. The air smelled of roses crushed underfoot and hot iron fresh from a forge. Her eyes shone with a predatory gleam that made candlelight seem tame. "Rook," she said, and his name in her mouth was a promise and a threat braided together. Magda swore under her breath. Hela clutched his hammer and began to mutter prayers that sounded more like curses. Rook stepped forward, blade raised. "This ends." Celestine's laugh was soft and delighted. "You keep saying that," she murmured, "as if you believe endings are yours to claim." For a heartbeat, the veil seemed thinner, and beneath it something moved, an outline too sharp, a curve too wrong, a suggestion of a smile made of points. Nobility fell away like a costume shrugged off for a dance. "You're not a woman," Rook said, voice rough. Celestine tilted her head. "I'm whatever you need me to be," she replied. "That's why you opened the door for me." Rook's jaw clenched. "I didn't open." Celestine lifted one gloved hand, and the tokens in Rook's coat throbbed so hard it made his teeth ache. "You did," she whispered. "Every retrieval, every delivery, every little choice you called necessity." Her gaze slid past him to Oscar, shaking behind Magda. "The last clean thread," she cooed. "The last note." Then her eyes returned to Rook, and the world narrowed until it was only him and her and the space between. "Give him to me," Celestine said gently. "Finish what you started." Rook's throat went dry. Part of him wanted to obey so badly it felt like hunger. The thought of her approval, her touch, his mind, tried to paint it as relief. Celestine took a step closer. The air warmed. "And I will make you my favored hunter," she purred. "No more muddy roads, no more coin-counting in taverns. Wealth, thrill, adoration, a place in the new story being written." Her gloved fingers lifted, hovering near his cheek without touching. "Choose me, Rook. Not obedience. Choice. I want you to want it." Rook's hands trembled. Magda's voice cut through, sharp as shattered glass. "Rook!" He blinked hard, like waking from drowning. The road wardens had rallied. Their sergeant shouted orders, trying to carve sense out of nightmare. Cultists surged again, chanting louder. Blue fire climbed the ruined stones on the hill, and within the chapel's broken archway, something red began to form a tall, impossible shape like a door made of light and blood-dark velvet. The red door. Hella's face contorted in horror. "It's blooming," he rasped. "Sigma, help us." Rook's gaze snapped to Oscar. Oscar, shaking, ordinary, terrified. A man whose greatest sin had been wanting a quiet life. Rook made his choice. He yanked the bundle of tokens from inside his coat and thrust them into Hella's hands. "Oil!" he snapped. Hella stared, confused. "What?" "The sanctified oil you keep for last rites," Rook snarled. "Now." Hella fumbled inside his cassock and produced a small vial, cheap glass, precious contents. He thrust it out with shaking fingers. Rook grabbed it, splashed oil over the tokens and the dented brass locket, and felt the air recoil. The blue fire on the hill flickered, as if uncertain. Celestine's eyes narrowed. For the first time, something like irritation crept through her calm. Rook held the slick tokens up, oil dripping from his knuckles. Then he spoke the couplet again, but wrong. Not misremembered, not mistaken, wrong on purpose. "Feather breaks," he said, voice a growl. "Water forgets." The cultists screamed, as if stabbed. The blue fire sputtered. Celestine's smile sharpened. "Oh," she breathed, delighted and furious at once. "Clever little mortal," Rook continued, forcing the words like a blade through his own throat. "When the red moon drowns," reality bucked like a spooked horse. The tokens shrieked not sound, but sensation, a needle in the mind. Oil flared on them with a dirty orange flame that fought the blue. The spiral bird motif writhed in the firelight, lines twisting, trying to align, trying to resist. Rook slammed the burning bundle into the mud at the base of a standing stone and stomped hard, grinding flame and metal and oil into the earth. The blue fire on the hill spasmed. The red door flickered, its edges wavering like heat haze. Celestine's veil fluttered, as if struck by a wind that didn't touch anything else. Her voice slipped again into that silk over broken glass tone, raw with anger and joy. "You would ruin my lock," she hissed. "After all we built together?" Rook's teeth bared. "I'm not yours." Celestine stepped toward him, and for a heartbeat her glamour fell entirely. Rook saw it not fully, not cleanly, because the mind rejected what it couldn't house, a shape too elegant and too wrong, limbs that suggested grace and threat at once, a smile that promised pleasure as a weapon, eyes like candlelight reflected in a predator's gaze. Then the glamour returned, like a veil dropped over a corpse. Celestine reached for him. Rook backed away, but the air itself seemed to hold him. Her presence pressed into his thoughts, offering relief, offering surrender, offering the sweet ease of letting someone else steer. Magda screamed something. Rook didn't hear the words. Heller swung his hammer at a cultist's head, and the sound was wet and final. Road wardens clashed with chanting men. Crossbow bolts thudded into bodies. Steel rang. Mud sprayed. People slipped, fell, got trampled. The world was a grinder, and faith and fear were the stones. Rook forced his legs to move, tore free from the invisible pull, and grabbed Oscar by the collar. "Run," he snarled. Oscar stumbled, eyes wild. "Where?" "Away from her." Celestine laughed softly. "You can't run from a story," she murmured. The red door flickered again, weak, starving, but still there. Rook shoved Oscar into Magda. "Take him," he barked. "Get him out!" Magda grabbed Oscar and hauled him toward the trees, half dragging him through mud. Heller followed, limping, swinging his hammer like a man trying to beat back the end of the world. Rook stayed behind, because someone had to. Celestine watched him, amused. "Heroics," she purred. "So ugly, so noble. I could almost love it." Rook lifted his pistol, found, somehow, back in his hand, as if the world had decided to give him one last honest tool. He aimed not at her body, but at the air around her, at the space where her glamour seemed thickest. He fired. The shot tore through the fog like a scream. The bullet struck something unseen and made the air ripple. Celestine's head snapped slightly, more surprised than hurt. Rook fired again. The second shot made her veil flutter violently, as if struck by a gust for a heartbeat. Her smile showed through too wide, too sharp. Then she moved, not walking, not running, sliding through space like a thought. She was suddenly close, too close, and her gloved hand touched Rook's cheek. Warmth flared through him like a brand. His knees buckled. Her voice poured into his ear like honey laced with poison. "You chose," she whispered. "Even now, you chose to defy me. You chose to make it dramatic. You chose to keep me interested." Rook's vision swam. The world tilted. In the corner of his eye, the red door shuddered, its glow dimming as the disrupted ritual starved. Celestine's fingers tightened, and pain sparked sharp, intimate like a mark being pressed into flesh without a knife. Rook clenched his jaw until it ached. "Get off!" Celestine sighed, pleased. "Not yet." Then she released him, stepping back with feline grace. She lifted her hand, and Rook saw on her glove nothing. No blood, no grime, only perfection. On his cheek, heat lingered like a kiss that burned. The red door sputtered again, its edges fraying. Celestine's eyes narrowed, calculating. The ritual was failing. The lock was broken. The key had been pulled away, but she didn't look defeated. She looked entertained. "You've made yourself useful in a different way," she said softly. "I'll miss the simplicity." Rook forced himself upright, shaking. "You're not opening it." Celestine's smile returned. "Not today," she allowed. "But you've shown me something better." Her gaze raked over him like a lover undressing prey. "You." The blue fire on the hill guttered out in a hiss of smoke and sour perfume. The red door collapsed inward like a curtain yanked down. A shockwave of ordinary air rushed through the meadow, cold and wet and real. Cultists screamed as their certainty fractured. Some fell to their knees, suddenly just tired men in mud. Some ran. Some kept fighting because they didn't know how to stop. The road wardens regrouped, panting, bloodied, staring at the ruin as if it might rise again. Celestine stood in the chaos, like a queen in a slaughterhouse. Then she was gone. No retreat, no footfall, just absence, and the lingering scent of crushed roses and iron. Rook stood alone among mud and bodies and broken faith, breathing hard, feeling the heat mark on his cheek throb like a second heartbeat. Magda returned at dawn, face pale, hair plastered to her forehead, Oscar stumbling behind her like a man waking from a long fever. Hela limped at their side, hammer hanging heavy, eyes haunted. "It's done?" Magda asked, voice raw. Rook stared toward the hill where the ruins sat silent beneath grey sky. "It stopped," he said, "for now." Hela's gaze fixed on Rook's cheek. "You've been touched," he muttered. Rook didn't answer. They left the meadow as the sun rose, weak and thin, lighting the mud and making it look like old bruises. The road was empty, but Rook felt watched anyway, as if the world had grown an eye behind him. He rode out at dawn with his coat torn and his eyes shadowed. In his pocket, a single red ribbon seal remained, one he hadn't noticed until the chaos ended. It shouldn't still have been warm. Above the road, a flock of birds wheeled in the morning air, turning in a spiral that looked, if you stared too long, like writing.